Hey you. Yes you. Tonight, we're stepping into the medieval world. A time when people looked at their surroundings and simply agreed, yes, this is fine. But was it really fine? Or was it something else entirely? Something darker. Something so strange that you will not believe what was once considered completely normal. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe to A Little Too Historical. And if you enjoy history that is stranger than fiction, hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. Now dim the lights and settle in, because tonight we are uncovering the creepy things that were just another Tuesday in medieval times. Imagine waking up in a world where death is everywhere, where bones line the walls of churches, where bloodletting is medicine, where you might share a bed with a stranger and never think twice about it. This was not a nightmare. This was medieval life. So what made the medieval world so unsettling? What did they do that we would find absolutely horrifying today? And why did none of it seem to bother them? Let's find out together. Death was not a distant concept in medieval times. It was a neighbor, a very quiet neighbor that never moved out and occasionally resurfaced after heavy rain. Graveyards were not peaceful, fenced-off spaces for quiet reflection. They were public zones, thoroughfares, social areas. If you were late for market, you cut through the cemetery. If you needed a private word with someone, you met between two graves. If you were a child looking for a place to play, you were now playing tag among the deceased, and nobody thought this was odd. Burials were temporary arrangements at best. Space was limited. Bodies were plentiful. Medieval soil did not respect personal boundaries. Coffins collapsed. Rain eroded graves. Bones slowly emerged as if they had unfinished business. Finding a skull after a storm was not a horror movie moment. It was a maintenance issue, the medieval equivalent of seeing a pothole and thinking someone should probably deal with that. People nudged bones aside with their feet. They stacked them near church walls. They reburied them loosely like tidying a blanket that slipped off the couch. No screaming, no fainting. Just quiet acceptance and mild inconvenience. Churchyards doubled as meeting spaces. Business deals were discussed next to headstones. Arguments happened beside graves. Children ran around while adults negotiated prices for bread, all under the watchful gaze of several generations of skeletons who had seen much worse. This did not make medieval people morbid. It made them practical. When death is everywhere, it stops being dramatic. It becomes part of the environment, like mud church bells or that one neighbor who always smells faintly of sheep. Imagine growing up learning to walk while carefully avoiding grave markers. Imagine being told not to kick the skull because that belongs to someone. Imagine stepping over a femur on your way to buy vegetables and thinking, huh, again. To a medieval person, this was not creepy. It was convenient. Death was not hidden, feared, or denied. It was present, acknowledged, and quietly tolerated like bad weather or an unpopular tax. And perhaps that is the creepiest thing of all. When something terrifying becomes so familiar that it barely registers anymore, you have to wonder what we are normalizing right now that will make future generations shudder in the dark. At some point, medieval Europe ran into a problem that modern city planners would recognize immediately. There were simply too many dead people and not enough space to put them. Graveyards filled up fast because medieval life had a habit of ending suddenly and without much warning. When space ran out, medieval society did what it always did. It improvised calmly and with unsettling confidence. The solution was the ossuary. Instead of expanding cemeteries, endlessly old graves were dug up, and the skeletons were removed once the flesh had done everyone the courtesy of disappearing. These bones were not discarded. They were recycled, stacked, sorted, organized. Very neatly, in fact, because nothing says respect like good bone management. Skulls were arranged in rows. Femurs were piled like firewood. Entire walls were built out of human remains. Chapels were decorated with them. Ceilings supported by them. In some places, bones were arranged into patterns and symbols just to show that, yes, this was intentional interior design. And people prayed there. Not nervously. Not quickly. They knelt. They bowed their heads. They spoke softly, surrounded by thousands of empty eye sockets, silently attending the service. This was not considered morbid. It was considered practical. Bones were reminders of mortality, sure, but they were also space-saving solutions. Medieval minimalism. The truly unsettling part is how unbothered everyone was. Children grew up attending church in rooms literally made of ancestors. Travelers visited ossuaries the way we visit museums. Locals gave directions like turn left at the skull wall. Nobody felt the need to explain themselves. If anything, ossuaries were comforting. They represented order. The dead were not lost. They were organized, cataloged, watching politely from the walls. Death had a place, and that place had shelves. Imagine explaining this to a modern person. Yes, this is where we worship. Yes, those are skulls. No, we do not find it strange. Please stop screaming. To medieval people, this was not creepy. It was efficient. When death is everywhere, you do not hide it. You stack it neatly and move on. But when the walls themselves are watching, you have to wonder who is really being remembered and who is simply being stored. If living next to graves and praying beside bone walls did not convince you medieval life had a unique relationship with fear, allow me to introduce medieval medicine. A field built on confidence, tradition, and the bold assumption that less blood is always better than more blood. Bloodletting was the medieval cure for almost everything. Fever, bloodletting. Headache, bloodletting. Feeling tired, sad, anxious, or mildly inconvenienced by existence, congratulations, it was time to remove some blood. Doctors believed the body was governed by humors, and illness came from imbalance. The solution was not rest diet or common sense. It was opening a vein and hoping for the best. And here's the fun part. Doctors were not always the ones doing it. Barbers handled bloodletting. The same person who trimmed your beard and shaved your head could also decide today was a good day to drain you like a leaky barrel. This was not considered alarming. It was considered efficient. Why visit two professionals when one man with a blade could handle both hair and circulatory issues? The iconic red and white barber pole still exists today. And no, it is not decorative. The red represents blood. The white represents bandages. In other words, it is a centuries-old sign that says haircuts available, veins optional. The process itself was quick and confident. A small cut, a bowl placed beneath, blood flowing freely while the practitioner nodded thoughtfully as if watching the answer to life's problems drip out in real time. If you started to feel dizzy, that meant it was working. If you fainted, that meant it was really working. Bloodletting was scheduled too. Some people were bled regularly, even when healthy, just to stay balanced. Imagine booking a routine appointment to lose a portion of your vital fluids and walking out thinking, ah yes, much better. Of course, results varied. Some patients recovered, others became weaker, a few died. This was considered acceptable statistical noise. The truly unsettling part is not the practice itself, it is the faith people placed in it. Bloodletting was not questioned. It was trusted. Generations accepted it because it was normal. And that quiet certainty that the path to health involved losing what keeps you alive might be the creepiest diagnosis of all. But if bleeding was the cure, you have to wonder what they considered a real emergency. At some point, medieval society looked at crime, justice, and responsibility and decided animals should be held fully accountable too. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, legally. If a pig injured a child, the pig could be arrested. If rats destroyed crops, they could be summoned to court. Insects that ruined vineyards were sometimes formally accused. This was not satire. This was paperwork. Animals were brought before judges, assigned legal representation, and given sentences. Pigs were the most frequent defendants, largely because pigs were everywhere and had absolutely no respect for personal boundaries. If a pig attacked someone, it might be dressed in human clothing and executed publicly, because clearly the issue was moral failure, not the fact that pigs are pigs. And everyone took this seriously. Court records describe trials where lawyers argued on behalf of animals with complete professionalism. A defense attorney might argue that the rats failed to appear in court because the roads were unsafe or because cats posed a legitimate threat to their safety. This was considered a strong legal argument. Sometimes animals were excommunicated. Yes, excommunicated. Priests issued formal curses ordering pests to leave the area or face spiritual consequences. The animals, unsurprisingly, rarely complied, but the ritual itself mattered. It restored order. It showed that authority had been asserted. What makes this particularly unsettling is how calm and logical it all seemed at the time. Medieval people believed the world was governed by moral rules that applied to everyone, humans, animals, and occasionally objects. If something caused harm, it must be judged. That was it. End of discussion. No one asked whether the pig understood the charges. No one worried about intent. Responsibility was universal. If something bad happened to someone, or something had to be punished publicly so the universe could relax again. From a modern perspective, it is absurd. From a medieval one, it was comforting. The world made sense. Justice reached everywhere. Chaos was being managed. Imagine standing in a crowd, watching a pig on trial, and thinking, yes, this seems correct. To medieval people, this was not cruelty. It was order. The idea that animals might be above the law that would have been truly unthinkable. But if a pig could be condemned, you have to wonder what happened to the humans who really deserved it. In medieval times, sleep was not a private, sacred experience. It was a group activity, a practical arrangement, a mild social experiment conducted every single night. Entire families slept in one bed. Not just parents and children, sometimes grandparents too. Beds were expensive, space was limited, and warmth mattered more than personal boundaries. Body heat was a resource, and medieval people were very efficient with resources. If you had a bed to yourself, you were either wealthy, sick, or deeply suspicious. And did not stop with family. If you traveled and stayed at an inn, chances were high you would be sharing a bed with a stranger, possibly multiple strangers. Gender separation was flexible. Privacy was a concept still in development. You climbed into bed, nodded politely to the person already there, and hoped they did not snore, itch excessively, or try to tell you their life story at midnight. This was considered normal hospitality. Inns did not advertise private rooms because that was not the expectation. They advertised a bed singular. The bed was communal. Think of it less like a hotel and more like a medieval sleep lottery. You never knew who you would wake up next to, assuming you woke up at all and were not eaten alive by fleas during the night. And yes, fleas were present always. They lived in the bedding, the straw, mattresses, the blankets, and occasionally on you. Scratching in bed was not rude, it was expected. If someone was not scratching, people assumed they were lying. Children grew up with this as their baseline. They learned early how to sleep without kicking, how to tolerate strangers' elbows, and how to accept that the warmth pressing against them might belong to someone they had never met before and would never meet again. Even the wealthy were not immune. Nobles slept in large chambers with servants nearby. Privacy was still limited. Someone was always watching, listening, or hovering with a candle. Solitude during sleep was rare and sometimes considered unsafe. The unsettling part is not the closeness, it is the lack of discomfort about it. Medieval people did not feel violated. They felt practical. Warmth mattered. Safety mattered. Personal space was negotiable. Imagine explaining modern sleep habits to a medieval person. Yes, I sleep alone. Yes, in my own room. Yes, the door is closed. They would look at you with suspicion and mild concern. To medieval people, sleeping alone was not peaceful, it was strange. And crawling into bed beside a complete stranger, that was just good manners. But if everyone was so comfortable in the dark, you have to wonder what else happened after the candles went out. After everything we have covered, the bones, the blood, the public suffering, the parasites, the constant danger, you might expect medieval people to have lived in a permanent state of fear, curled up, trembling, waiting for the next disaster. But that is not what happened. They adapted. That is the creepiest part of all. Medieval people woke up every day surrounded by things that would horrify us, and they felt fine. Not happy, not thrilled, just normal. This was life. This was the world as it had always been, and as far as they knew, always would be. Death did not shock them because it was familiar. Pain did not surprise them because it was expected. Danger did not paralyze them because it was constant. When something is everywhere, it stops being dramatic. It becomes background noise. A skull in a graveyard was not terrifying. It was a reminder to watch where you stepped. Bloodletting was not frightening. It was healthcare. Sharing a bed with strangers was not invasive. It was practical. Fleas were not disgusting. They were roommates who refused to pay rent. Even violence lost its emotional edge. Public punishments were not spectacles of horror. They were lessons, order made visible, fear made useful. People learned when to turn away, and when to nod solemnly and go back to their chores. This was not because medieval people lacked empathy or imagination. It was because humans are incredibly good at normalizing the environment they are given. We build routines around danger. We tell stories to explain suffering. We develop humor dry, dark, and quiet to make the unbearable manageable. And if that sounds familiar, it should. Because every era has its own version of normal that future generations will find disturbing. Every age tolerates things it should not, because changing them feels impossible. Medieval people did not see themselves as living in a nightmare. They saw themselves as living in reality, which raises an uncomfortable question. What are we living with right now that feels normal but will not someday? That is the lingering chill medieval history leaves behind. Not the gore, not the fear, but the realization that humans can get used to almost anything, even horror. And when you realize that the truly creepy thing is not the past, but how easily we forget our own present.